I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke. In the last chapter, I was explaining how that Luke 21, in the section where it covers the darkness of the sun and the moon in Isaiah and Mark, he sort of shortens the reference to that, and he also refers to Isaiah 5:30, which is not explicitly referred to in Matthew and Mark. And I'm going to continue talking about that section of Luke. I have a chapter called Who Was in Perplexity in Isaiah 5:30. I showed in the last chapter that Luke 21 refers to Isaiah 5:30. I'll use the Septuagint to show who was in perplexity because Luke seems to have used a Greek text, not the Hebrew text, which is very different. Most English translations are from the Hebrew text. Here is Isaiah 5:30, Brenton, Septuagint. And he shall roar on account of them in that day, as the sound of the swelling sea. And they shall look to the land, and behold, there shall be thick darkness in their perplexity. And I highlighted the words they and their because this will turn out to be kind of important. Here is Luke 21:25, American Standard Version. And there shall be signs in sun, and moon, and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, in perplexity, for the roaring of the sea and the billows. Compare the Tischendorf Greek text of Luke 21:25. And I don't know much Greek, but to read it phonetically, it says something like sunoke ethnon in aporia. Who was in perplexity in Isaiah 5:30? It just said in their perplexity, with an unspecified pronoun. Luke defines the ambiguous pronoun by saying distress of nations in perplexity. And that's this right here. Luke substituted a genitive plural noun for the pronoun, that is ethnon, meaning of the nations, for auton, meaning of them or their. The nations are the gentiles. A careful reading of all of Luke 21 shows that the nations or gentiles were the ethnon of Luke 21:25. The same word for nations is used in verse 10. Ethnos, ethnos. In the phrase nation shall rise against nation. Verse 24, ethne, shall be led captive into all the nations. Twice again in verse 24, ethnon, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. The English translator has to make the choice whether to translate ethnos as nation or Gentile. The word means nation, but often means non-Jewish nation in the Bible. The adjective non-Jewish being suppressed, that is, not written but understood. The word nation is not used a single time for the Jews in Luke 21. When an English translator says Gentiles, he means Gentile nations. The word nations being subadded, that is, untranslated but understood. And I'll interject here that when you read more than one translation of the Bible, where one translator says Gentile, another will say nation, because that's all that the Greek text says was a word for nation. The word Gentile is actually derived from the Latin word for nation, but never includes Jews in English. Despite the etymology, it means non-Jewish nations. The word nations in Luke 21 is used in the unfavorable way that non-Jews are described in the book of Daniel, namely as foreign enemies and conquerors of the Jews. Luke 21:24, the verse with three occurrences of the word nation or Gentile, refers to Daniel 7:23 and 25, which verses are about a terrifying, trampling beast. Which beast symbolized a Gentile king or kingdom, or Gentile armies, as I have explained elsewhere. I'm writing unusual explanations, so I'll summarize the thinking of my book. Luke corrected and explained Mark and Matthew to write a new gospel. Therefore, Luke's gospel abounds in explanations. He substitutes one term for another, like armies for abomination of desolation, and like times of the nations for a time and times and half a time. He interjects explanations in the midst of passages that otherwise resemble Mark and Matthew. See Luke 21:21. That is what he did here. Luke 21:25 through 26 began as something like this part of Matthew 24:29 through 30. And I went over this in the previous episode. But Matthew reads, "The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." Luke 21:25 through 26 reads, and what I put in bold here comes directly from Matthew, or almost directly. "And there shall be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations in perplexity, for the roaring of the sea and the billows, men fainting for fear and for expectation of the things which are coming on the world. For the powers of the heaven shall be shaken, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." If you separate the part of Luke 21:25 through 26 that originated in the corresponding passage in Matthew, what you have left are a reference to Isaiah 5:30 as well as explanatory comments authored by Luke and interjected into Matthew 24:29 through 30 to explain what Jesus meant. And I'm referring there to the two sections of brackets here, one referring to Isaiah 5:30 and one being Luke's explanatory comments. Luke knew that the metaphors about the failure of the heavenly bodies, originally probably from Isaiah 13:9 and 10 and 34:4, were likely to be taken literally. Economizing on words, Luke referred to but did not quote Jesus' actual words as recorded in Matthew. Likewise, he referred to but did not quote Isaiah 5:30, which has a similar figurative meaning. In my last chapter, I showed that Chrysostom and Cornelius a Lapide agreed that Isaiah 5:30 uses a metaphor that is not to be taken literally and which portrays great fear. Then Luke wrote the meaning of that passage from Isaiah. That was the same as the meaning of the signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Men fainting for fear and for expectation of the things which are coming on the world. In other words, the metaphors could have been left out, and it could have just been stated that men will be afraid. Then Luke finished the section with words like those in Matthew, which are these in bold in brackets. So I'm going to skip some of this material to try to keep my video a little bit shorter. The readers of the Septuagint would have misunderstood the pronouns in Isaiah 5:30. Brenton translated the verse as follows, and he shall roar on account of them in that day as the sound of the swelling sea, and they shall look to the land, and behold, there shall be thick darkness in their perplexity. The reader of the Septuagint would have thought that the antecedent for the word there is the preceding they. That is, the reader of the Septuagint would think that those who look to the land will be in perplexity. But the Septuagint is wrong. Surprisingly, Luke shows that the antecedent for the pronoun there is the earth, meaning the nations of the earth. Notice that Otley translated the earth, and I skipped Otley, but he translated the earth where Brenton translated the land. English translators usually prefer to say earth in Luke 21:25. Judea did suffer distress, but Luke 21:25 through 26 is talking about the distress of the Gentile world. So according to Luke 21:25, the nations, the Gentiles, the non-Jews, would be in distress and in perplexity. Upon the earth, distress of nations in perplexity. Luke gives the reason for this as the roaring of the sea and the billows, which is yet another reference to Isaiah 5:30. Luke explains in plain language that Gentile men would faint for fear and expectation of the things which are coming on the world. Luke got that information from the words of Isaiah 5:30. And they shall look to the land, and behold, there shall be thick darkness in their perplexity. The land or earth is the land of the nations or Gentiles. Luke calls it the world. And what confuses the reading of this now, I'll cover it later, is this word they. This first word they should not read they. I'll cover it later. It probably refers to God looking at the earth. But if we read Isaiah 5 alone without comparing it with Luke 21, we would probably agree with many commentators who believe that the Jews, not the Gentiles, were in perplexity. The previous verse, Isaiah 5:29, says that the Gentile invaders roar like lions in some translations. Then verse 30 speaks of roaring again in some translations. So you're going to think it's the same people because they roar in both verses. Even though the word land probably refers to Judea in Luke 21:23, I am saying that the same word means the part of the earth where Gentiles live in verse 25. This is contrary to the reader's expectation because for Isaiah 5:30 to mention distress of Gentiles requires it to suddenly change the subject from the distress of the Jews to the distress of the nations. And I covered how that is completely scriptural or biblical in my previous episode or video. Some commentators have insisted that the earth in Luke 21:25 refers to Judea. I eliminated a chapter that refutes them, but I will mention here that Luke in his Gospel and also in Acts of the Apostle frequently uses the same Greek word translated earth or land to refer to Gentiles. Cornelius a Lapide incorrectly said that Isaiah 5:30 was about the distress of the Judeans in a quotation above. Chrysostom also incorrectly referred that passage to the Jews, saying that they looked to the land as well as to the heavens for help, but found none. Those comments sound reasonable, but they disagree with Luke. So I'm going to cover some points from the next section called "The Sound of the Sea Causes the Perplexity of the Gentiles" in Luke 21:25. Just like a dark sun and a dark moon would cause the perplexity, anguish, or fear of people that saw them. So certain translations, including the King James Version, do not say that the sea and the waves caused the distress of nations. Luke wouldn't have approved of those translations. I'm skipping Alfred Plummer's comments, but what he called the Rhemish version, the Douay of Luke 21:25, reads, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations by reason of the confusion of the roaring of the sea and of the waves." Plummer is saying that the Vulgate correctly translated in aporia ecus as prae confusione, showing causation. By reason of means because of. Plummer approved of the Revised Version, which reads like the American Standard Version, "in perplexity for the roaring of the sea and its billows." The preposition for in those versions is a causal preposition like because of. Isaiah 5:30 does not clearly state that the roaring of the sea caused the darkness and distress of the nations on earth, but that is how Luke understood it. That's the way you're supposed to picture it. If you read about the sun turning black and the people are scared, then that's the cause of it. And if you read about a stormy sea and the people are scared, well, the stormy sea caused the fear.